You didn't arrive here by accident. This found you the way a plot twist announces itself long before the character understands the story is about to turn. There's a strange tension around you now, quiet, subtle, but unmistakable, like the suspended breath a story takes just before the page shifts. And if you're honest, you've felt it. That low hum beneath your daily life, that sense that something is beginning to break pattern. These moments don't simply appear unless your inner timeline is already bending in a direction you can't yet see. And the psyche is trying to draw your attention to it. Carl Jung believed that before life changes, the unconscious sends symbols ahead of the event, like shadows stretching forward before the storm arrives. That is why this moment matters. If this reached you today, something in your inner narrative is tightening, rearranging, preparing. Major plot twists are never sudden in the depths of the psyche. The psyche whispers first, and before the shift reveals itself in your waking life, your deeper self wants you to recognize the movement already unfolding within you. Life does not change at random. Jung taught that the unconscious begins reshaping reality long before the conscious mind becomes aware of where things are moving. Plot twists feel abrupt only because the ego was not listening to the signals forming beneath the surface. Just before a major change, the psyche becomes active, dreams grow vivid, restlessness increases, old emotions return with new sharpness, and strange coincidences begin gathering around you like breadcrumbs. These are not accidents. They are psychological foreshadowing. From a Jungian perspective, a plot twist is the moment the outer storyline collapses to reveal the inner one, the life you were meant to live breaking through the life you were merely enduring. The ego prefers straight lines, predictable arcs, familiar roles. But the deeper self has no interest in keeping you unchanged. It rewrites the script when growth demands it. This message appearing now is part of that rewrite. It marks an initiation, a signal that something within you has reached a threshold. To understand why this found you at this exact moment, you must understand what the psyche does in the hours and days before life turns the page. Before the script is rewritten, the atmosphere around you tightens in ways that are easy to dismiss yet impossible to escape. This pressure is where every true plot twist begins. Something inside you no longer settles the way it once did. Emotions rise faster, fall harder, linger longer. A passing remark cuts deeper than expected. An old memory surfaces without warning. A familiar routine suddenly feels foreign, as though it belongs to someone else. Jung wrote that the unconscious applies pressure long before the conscious mind understands why. This pressure is not cruelty, it is correction. It is the loosening of an outdated narrative that can no longer contain who you are becoming. You experience it as a quiet dissatisfaction that refuses to hide behind distraction any longer. Something in your life has grown too tight, too rehearsed, too predictable to contain who you are becoming. The walls of the familiar feel closer than they should. The rhythm of your days sounds slightly off, as if the script you've been performing is beginning to tear at the seams. What once fit now constricts. What once flowed now resists. And you can sense, even if you cannot yet name it, that the story you've been living no longer has enough room for your next becoming. This is not anxiety, though it is often mistaken for it, nor is it confusion, though it arrives wearing uncertainty as a disguise. This is the psyche taking hold of the old storyline and pulling just hard enough for you to feel the strain. Restlessness appears without a clear cause. Thoughts you once avoided begin circling back. Truths you were not ready to speak press closer to the surface. You sense something approaching, not danger, but direction, and beneath it all, the quieter voice you have ignored for years begins to return, not in words, but in impulses, hesitations, sudden clarity, and sudden discomfort. The unconscious is quietly rearranging the architecture of your inner world, preparing the ground for a revelation that can no longer be delayed. It has no concern for your current plans or carefully constructed expectations. It cares only for alignment. And because of this, the tension increases just before the shift becomes visible. When the pressure can no longer be denied, when the old story can no longer stretch to contain who you are becoming, the soul begins to reorganize the narrative from within. The reversal does not arrive with thunder. It arrives as a subtle, yet disorienting shift in perspective, as if the camera of your life tilts by a single degree, and suddenly the entire scene appears different. What once felt stable begins to wobble, not because it is collapsing, but because the psyche is turning it toward truth. A pattern you have repeated for years suddenly refuses to continue. The script you thought you knew begins rejecting its own lines. You notice yourself pausing before reacting the way you always have, or you feel a strange clarity cutting through emotions that once overwhelmed you. This is the narrative reversal, the moment the unconscious quietly turns the page and reveals a part of your story you were not ready to read before. It may arrive through an ending you did not choose, a conversation that reaches deeper than expected, a realization that cuts cleanly through denial, or a meeting that rearranges your inner world in a single heartbeat. Carl Jung would say this is the ego encountering reality, not the outer one, but the inner truth that has been building pressure in the dark. When the reversal occurs, it feels like a plot twist because you are suddenly seeing yourself without disguise. The habits that were once coping mechanisms, the relationships that served as placeholders, the dreams that belonged to an earlier version of you begin to fall away. Illusions collapse not to punish you, but to free what has been suffocating beneath an outdated story. The reversal is the psyche's way of turning on the lights. What was blurred sharpens. What was hidden steps forward. What was avoided finally names itself. And though the moment may feel chaotic, it is not disorder at work. It is precision. The unconscious continues threading the narrative back toward alignment. What many experience as disorientation is often mistaken for failure or loss, yet in Jungian psychology these reversals mark the precise moment the deeper self intervenes. This is where the story stops obeying the ego and begins obeying truth. The plot does not break here. It reveals its true direction, and once that inner direction becomes visible, once the shock of recognition settles, the story does not collapse. It clarifies. As the reversal settles into awareness, something begins to glow beneath the surface, the revelation hidden inside the twist. It is the moment the psyche turns the lights on in a room you never realized you were living in. It does not arrive with thunder or spectacle, but with a quiet, piercing clarity that feels almost intrusive. Suddenly, the patterns you once walked through blindly expose their structure. You see why you stayed where you no longer belonged, the beliefs you inherited rather than chose, the roles you learned to perform in order to survive instead of grow. Here, the narrative stops being linear and becomes transparent. You see the choices behind the choices, the wounds beneath the reactions, the self behind the defenses. It feels like remembering something you never consciously learned, as if your life had been hinting at this truth for years, waiting for the moment you could finally face it. Jung described this as the illumination of the unconscious, the shadow stepping forward not as an enemy, but as a forgotten part of you asking to be reclaimed. The experience can feel like shock, like grief, like relief braided into trembling recognition. A mask loosens, a facade dissolves, and you encounter the version of yourself that has been trying to reach you through dreams, restlessness, and unnamed emotions. This inner revelation is the true twist, not the outer event, but the awakening that reorganizes the meaning of everything around it. And while it can feel overwhelming, it is also deeply liberating, because once truth is seen, you cannot continue as the character you once were. Something within you moves closer to the center, closer to the life you were meant to live, rather than the one you settled for. This is why revelation carries both weight and freedom. It ends one identity and initiates another. Yet revelation is only half the movement. The psyche does not only want you to see, it wants you to shift. The next turn begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, as life rearranges itself around what you now know. Once the revelation settles into the psyche, the story does not merely continue. It begins rewriting itself from the inside out, reshaping the path ahead with a precision the conscious mind cannot yet name. This is the moment when what once felt fixed begins to loosen. The rewrite does not arrive with fireworks or declarations. It comes as a subtle inner reordering, a quiet but undeniable realignment of what matters, what no longer fits, and what your soul will not carry into the next chapter. You may feel your priority shifting without your permission. What once felt urgent now feels strangely hollow. What once seemed impossible begins to feel like the only honest direction left. You notice certain relationships starting to wobble, not through conflict, but because your inner gravity has shifted. You are being drawn toward those who resonate with who you are becoming, and pulled away from those who reflected an earlier version of your story. Opportunities you would once have overlooked begin appearing as quiet invitations, as though the world itself had been waiting for your inner narrative to realign. This is the psyche doing what Jung so often described, reorganizing itself around a deeper truth the ego can no longer avoid. There is a new steadiness here, a grounded certainty that asks for no explanation. It feels like standing in a room that has been silently rearranged, where the space suddenly makes sense, even if you cannot say when the change occurred. The confusion that once clouded your days begins to thin, not because every answer is now clear, but because you have stopped pretending you were meant to remain in the old chapter. This is the real plot twist, not the event itself, but the internal rewrite that prepares you to meet it without breaking. And the most surprising part is how natural it feels, how the new direction requires no force, but emerges like a path that was always there beneath the debris of outdated expectations and unconscious habits. As the rewrite settles, you realize the twist was never meant to undo you. It was meant to align you with a life you are finally ready to inhabit. Now, the question is no longer what the twist will be, but who you become after it. In these days before and after the shift, your task is not to analyze every feeling or predict every outcome, but to remain present enough to sense the story moving through you. Do not rush the narrative. Let it unfold at its own psychological tempo. Stay close to yourself. Notice what no longer fits, what feels lighter, what releases without struggle. Do not cling to the old storyline out of habit, and do not chase meaning in every coincidence. Observed, your psyche is preparing you for something that will tilt the axis of your life, and the power lies in how gently you meet the transition. Jung taught that fate is often the name we give to the parts of ourselves we have ignored for too long. When they rise, the story must bend. Trust the inner movement more than the outer noise. Your narrative is already changing, and the deeper self is positioning you exactly where you need to stand. This did not appear before the plot twist. It appeared because the plot twist has already begun moving through your life, reshaping the unseen architecture of your days. Something within you crossed an invisible threshold, and the unconscious arranged this moment so you would not miss the turn ahead. You may not yet see the shape of the next chapter, but you can feel its gravity drawing you forward. The story you thought you were living is giving way to the one you were meant to inhabit. And as you step into it, remember this is where the movements of the psyche are no longer hidden, and what once remained unseen becomes inevitable.